Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Marwan Masood. I'm working as an assistant professor at United International University, and I finished my master's in Solve from the University of Warwick. So today I'm going to discuss the merits of adopting student-centered, project-based approach in English language classrooms. So basically, I'm going to discuss student-centered teaching approach first. I'm not going to go into details because we all know what a student-centered teaching approach is. And then I'm going to discuss project-based approach and the importance of pre, while, and post activities, as well as authenticity of materials and reflection in student-centered project-based approach. Then I'm going to discuss the assessment techniques in a project-based approach, and then I'm going to discuss an exploratory action research that I conducted in my classes, conducting the needs analysis, as well as I'm going to discuss the findings and the limitations of this study. So we all know about student-centered teaching approach. We all are kind of adopting it in our classes. We want our students to be the focal points of our classroom, and we want to focus on their development and improvement. So it is a way of thinking about teaching and learning that focuses on students' responsibility and their learning rather than on the content or what the teachers are doing. And in such an approach, as we all know, students are in charge of their learning. They have the full responsibility of their learning, and they involve in the learning process as well as participate in every activity. The relationship between learners are more equal, and it promotes growth and development. And the teacher becomes a resource person or a facilitator in such an approach. And the learners experience the merging of his education through the parallel flowing of the affective and cognitive domains. And the learner sees himself differently. They see themselves as a change agent, an active agent in their learning process. So a student-centered approach is particularly important for adopting a project-based approach, because a project-based approach is absolutely and entirely student-centered. So in a project-based approach, the teaching focuses on engaging students in investigation. Within this framework, students pursue ideas, make presumptions, they design plans and conduct experiments, they collect data and analyze data, they draw conclusions, they communicate their ideas and findings, they ask new questions, and they create outputs. So in a project-based learning approach, the English that is tailored for the classroom is connected with the English that is used in real life. So a bridge is created. And it is an experiential learning cycle, because learners reflect on their experience, their learning process, they concretize their abstract ideas, and they actively experiment with newly acquired knowledge, which leads to acquiring more experience. So what should a student-centered project-based course look like? So in a student-centered project-based language course, students should involve in discussion and communication through a variety of activities in each lesson, where they are forced to use their existing knowledge, and then they synthesize their existing knowledge with newly acquired information through project-based work and experiential learning, and eventually they produce original outputs collaboratively as well as individually. And the key features of such a course is the authenticity of materials. It is very important to have authentic materials, and there should be some scope of using technology, as well as the focus would be on grammar and vocabulary, as well as tasks that are related to all 4 language skills. And there should be a structure of pre, while, and post activities in such an approach, and there should be projects at the end of every lesson. So why authenticity of materials? We all know authentic materials are very important, because an authentic text is real language, and it is produced by a real speaker or a writer, and it is for real audience based on real life, and it conveys a real message. So authentic reading text refers to texts that are produced for real world purposes. For example, it can be newspapers, magazines, rather than a tailored set of materials particularly developed for an English language classroom. So it does not include artificial language. And also, students should be familiarized with listening to real-world language as well. So the real-world language will be spoken in a real-world context. It can be delivered or telecast via radio or television programs, but it is not particularly staged for any classroom purpose. And then why pre, while, and post activities are important in a project-based teaching approach. That is because in a student-centered course, students can engage in pre-reading activities that may include discussions or short vocabulary activities, and while reading activities can involve detecting the main ideas from each paragraph, and post activities can include text-based activities that help students to develop their comprehension skills. And in the writing process, the pre-writing activities can involve brainstorming, forming WH questions. Post-writing activities can involve sharing, reading aloud, and while writing activities can involve drafting, revising, or editing. And pre-listening activities in such a course would may include discussions and short pronunciation-related listening activities, while listening activities can include carefully selected points that can be used as stimuli to guide students as to what information they should look for. And for post-listening activities, extended forms of discussion can be implemented. And for pre-speaking, in the same way, some videos can be used to deduce main ideas and to write them in bullet points, while listening activities can include presenting a presentation, and post-speaking activities can include self-reflection and finding out areas of improvement. Now, reflection is very important in a project-based approach, because reflection, it is a reflexive approach. It requires both the student and the teacher to reflect upon their learning and teaching process. So reflection can be done through speaking or writing and self-evaluation. In a student-centered course, students can be given reflection-based activities to enable them to develop their metacognitive skills further. So if they're aware of their learning process, they are using their metacognition actively. And it helps them to voice their opinions and define their roles and reflect upon their ideas. So when students are provided with an opportunity to reflect on their own learning, their beliefs, their philosophies, their practices, and their prevailing ideologies, they will see themselves as active agents in the learning process, and this will continue throughout their life, even in their professional lives. Now, assessments. In a project-based course, assessments are done through both through formative assessments and summative assessments. Formative assessments are of particular importance because it focuses on the learners' improvement, learners' learning, learners' autonomy and metacognitive skills. And it is very different from the traditional assessment systems. It can be termed as alternative assessments. And learners can engage in a variety of assessment strategies. They can self-evaluate through, let's say, by using a portfolio. They can store all their learning materials there. They can write down their targets for their learning for this particular course. They can also include any document that shows their improvement throughout the duration of the course. So rubrics are also very important in a project-based teaching approach, because rubrics have the potential to help students to understand their targets for learning, the standards of quality for particular assignments, as well as it helps them to make dependable judgments on their own learning process. So every week, students can be given a feedback form, and in that they can evaluate the week's lesson. They can include activities and their reflection on the learning process, as well as they can share their thoughts and suggestions for improvement. And at the end of the course, they can have a summative evaluation of the course as a whole. So formative evaluations can result in improved summative evaluations, because through formative evaluations they will get ideas about the improvement areas, and in that way they will do better in the summative evaluations. So for this exploratory action research that I conducted, I first had to carry out a needs analysis. And in the needs analysis, I gave them a questionnaire, and the questions focused on the strengths and weaknesses of the learners, their exposure to English in their daily life, what they are able to do using English, why they think learning English is important, and what they want to achieve from an English course. So the questionnaire was sent to 400 students, and 227 responded. And the results suggested that most respondents came from Bengali medium schools, and they studied English as a mandatory subject in their secondary and higher secondary schools, and but the medium of instruction was not English. And the majority of them were not happy with their conversational skills. They thought that communication is the main purpose of learning English. However, they think that their speaking and listening skills were not good enough. And they also said that conversational English, they thought it to be the most important part or aspect of learning English. So the main study, after the needs analysis, the main study included 120 undergraduate students, and these students were asked to involve in a project where they would interview an interviewee who belongs to the wage earner group of the society, and they had to prepare a presentation on their findings based on his or her life and occupation. And the purpose was to involve learners in a student-centered project-based experiential learning activity, and the duration of this activity was 2 weeks, and there were 5 or 6 members in each group, so they had to collaborate with each other. So they did select a person from the wage earner group successfully, and they either selected a rickshaw puller, a vendor, a security guard, or a boatman. They interviewed the person in their native language, and then they prepared PowerPoint slides and presented them in the target language, and they discussed the lessons learned from the interview in detail. Also, they explained different parts of the interview in the target language. They completed peer evaluation at the end of their project, and they covered the areas of strengths and weaknesses of each group member. So this was the structure of their presentation. It included group members' introduction, preparation for the group project, interviews, introduction, playing the video of the interview, explaining different parts of the interview, lessons learned from the interview, how to apply the lessons learned from the interview in real life. They talked about group members' contribution, they covered peer evaluation, and then they concluded their presentation. So once evaluated, the groups scored high marks in group work, because everyone actually had to involve in group work, as it had many different aspects, the group project, so everyone had a role to play. And there was strong evidence of active learning, because students themselves had to create the materials of learning, and they actively had to engage in the project. They displayed evidence of deep learning and understanding, because they had to interview the interviewee, then analyze the data, and then examine the data to select important pieces of information. And they took full responsibility of their learnings in the project, since the project required them to use their agency and autonomy. And they acted upon instructions provided by the teacher. In that way, the mutual respect between the teacher and the student and their interdependence was established. And students had to evaluate their peers, and it required them to reflect upon their learning process. So it had pre, while, and post activities. As pre-activities, students engaged in discussion and brainstorming. They prepared a questionnaire to question their interviewee. They divided the workload among the group members. As while activities, they engaged in interviewing the interviewee, recording the interview, analyzing the collected data, selecting important information to share in the classroom, and preparing a PowerPoint presentation for the main task, which was the presentation. And as the post activities, they conducted peer evaluation and presented their findings. So students actually engaged in a project-based approach through this activity. They got the opportunity to engage in investigation, as well as they got the scope to ask questions, make presumptions, consider ideas, construct plans, collecting data, analyzing them, reaching conclusions, and reporting their findings, as well as they communicated their ideas, asked new questions, and created outputs. The students also involved in communicating new ideas and associating their existing ideas with new ideas. They were able to produce authentic output, and they were prompted to use the target language. As a result, they had to use their grammatical and vocabulary knowledge. Just a minute. So there was, of course, authenticity in the use of materials. The students used authentic materials because they created the materials themselves, and they engaged in reflection-based activities since they had to evaluate their group members' participation and performance, and they had the opportunity to voice their opinions as well as use their grammatical and vocabulary knowledge. So this was the evaluation rubric. They were evaluated based on content, group work, grammar, fluency, vocabulary, organization, slide presentation, and video presentation. And students were evaluated not summatively only, but also formatively. Throughout the duration of the activity, they were given feedback on their cooperation, their participation, and they also received a summative score. So students were also provided feedback on their activities during the course of the group project, as well as on areas of improvement, so that they could present the presentation flawlessly at the end. There were some limitations of this study, obviously. Although students engaged in a project-based activity, there was no control group, so the control group could not be compared with the research group. So the study was not elaborate enough, so students didn't have the opportunity to implement their findings in their real life, and also the opportunity to implement the findings was limited. And there was, when the groups were formed, they were formed randomly. So as a result, it could not be judged whether mixed ability group students could do a better job. So if the groups were formed based on their abilities, it would render more effective results. So in conclusion, it can be said that learning is a cyclic process integrating immediate experience, reflection, abstract conceptualization, and action. And a student-centered project-based course should aim at engaging learners fully in the learning process through a variety of learner-oriented pedagogical activities. And to face these challenges, proper planning and preparation are absolutely crucial. So that's all from me. Thank you so much for listening.